Hilchos Shegagos Perek Achad Asar, the laws of sacrifices for inadvertent transgressions, chapter 11. We're in the middle of discussing the carbon oil v'yodid, the up and down, the fluctuating sacrifice, where Torah says that in certain cases, we're going to reckon with your financial status. And based on that, that'll determine which sacrifice you bring. If you're most capable, you bring an animal. If you're less capable, you bring birds. In some cases, if you're even less capable, you bring flour. That's the carbon oil v'yodid. The Rambam told us yesterday, there are 6 such people in the Torah. 6 people have to bring a carbon oil v'yodid. 2 of them we already discussed in a previous book. 2 we're going to be discussing in the next set of laws. So what's left to discuss is the last 2. And that's called tumas mikdash v'kadashav. A person who's ritually impure and enters the temple premises, or a person who's ritually impure and eats sacrificial meat. In both of these cases, if you do so inadvertently, to atone for it, you have to bring a carbon oil v'yodid. Different to many other cases where you do a sin inadvertently, you bring a carbon chatas, the standard sin offering. Everyone brings an animal. Here, in these cases, you get to bring a sacrifice based on your financial means. Today's chapter is going to exclusively focus on a major difference that applies to these 2 prohibitions, different to any other prohibition. Besides the different sacrifice that you have to bring, the way you get to the sacrifice is majorly different. And I'll just say it outside, in short, and the Rambam will speak it out at great length. Any other time in the Torah where you're liable to a sin offering for an inadvertent act, the act can begin with complete lack of awareness. You don't know at all that you're dealing with a prohibited substance or a prohibited situation, and you just go into it and do the prohibition unknowingly. Later on you find out, now that you found out that you did a sin, you have to bring a sin offering. When it comes to the ritually impure person entering the temple or eating sacrificial meat, there's a special derivation from the Torah. If you examine the text, and the Rambam will walk us through it, the Torah indicates clearly that in order to be liable to the fluctuating sacrifice, you have to first have an awareness of the problematic state, and then forget about that problematic state, transgress the sin, and then remember it later. In other words, let's just use the case of impurity, because that's what it's all about. Tumas mikdash v'kadashav. You're impure, and you went into the temple or you ate sacrificial meat. You have to first know that you became impure. And then you have to, while being aware that you're impure, you have to also know that what you're looking at is sacrificial meat or the temple premises. Then you have to go into a lapse of awareness. You forget that you're impure, or you forget that it's the temple, or you forget that it's sacrificial meat. And in that state of forgetfulness, you do the sin. And then you wake up, you remember, I was impure, I did the sin. Different to any other case. Let's say another case involving a sin offering, you wouldn't have to know. Let's say you grew up, you didn't know what Shabbos was. And you transgressed the Shabbos. So you began with a lapse of awareness. You never had an awareness before. When you get educated and you realize it's Shabbos and you transgressed all those Shabboses, you still have to bring a sin offering, even though it fully began with a lapse of awareness. But in this case, you have to start with awareness, end with awareness, and the inadvertence or the lapse of awareness has to happen in the middle. That's going to be the basic thrust of the entire chapter today. And now let's have the Rambam say it himself. Halacha Aleph, Shinu Yesh, B'Shegagos Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashav. There's a major difference when it comes to the inadvertent act of a ritually impure person entering the temple or eating sacrificial meat, Masha'enkin B'Shar Krisos, which doesn't exist by any other prohibition that carries excision as its penalty. Remember in chapter 1, all sin offerings, you only bring them if you do an act that would have carried excision had you done it purposely. Now you did it inadvertently, so you're liable to a sin offering. So all these prohibitions are called krises because they're prohibitions that involve excision had you done them purposely. Now that you did them unintentionally, you're bringing either a sin offering or a carbon oil v'yodid in this case. And so the Rambam is telling us that there's a major difference between these 2 situations than any other situation. Besides the fact that the sacrifice is different, the whole situation is different. And that is, shakala krisis. In all other prohibitions that carry excision, kevan sheshagag. Once you did the act inadvertently, and you found out later that you sinned, even if you never had an awareness to begin with, like I said before, you didn't even know Shabbat existed, you entered it in a lapse of awareness. Later on when you find out, you're liable to bring a sin offering. But when it comes to this person ritually impure, going into the temple or eating sacrificial meat, he will not have to bring the fluctuating sacrifice until he has an awareness about his state of impurity, and an awareness that what he's looking at is sacrificial meat, or an awareness that it's the temple in the beginning. He also has to have an awareness of the impurity, or the fact that it's sacrificial meat, or that it's the temple at the end. And the lapse of awareness has to be in the middle. And the Rambam immediately gives some examples. Ketzad. What does this look like? Nitma. A person becomes impure, and he goes into the temple, or he eats sacrificial meat. But he didn't know that he became impure. There was no awareness to begin with. And later on, he finds out that he was impure. And that he was impure while he went into the temple or ate the sacrificial meat. Or he even finds out to begin with that it was sacrificial meat he was eating. Or that it was the temple that he entered. Maybe he lived far away, never been to the temple before, he doesn't know how it looks. And he wandered in, and then sometimes, hey, you know when you were impure and you were in the temple. In all these cases, there was no prior awareness. You're exempt from bringing a sacrifice. Until you're aware that you were impure, and you're aware that it's sacrificial meat, and you're aware that this is the temple, before you go in or before you eat. Ketzad, what would be an example of prior awareness? Nitma v'yada shenitma. Person becomes impure, and he knows that he's impure. V'yada shezeh mikdash v'shezeh kodesh. He also knows that this structure he's looking at is the temple, and the meat that he's looking at is sacrificial meat. V'achar kach nelma mimenu hatuma v'shachach shenitma. And then the tuma disappears from him. He forgets that he's impure. V'nichnas lamikdash oy ochal kodesh, and he goes into the temple or eats sacrificial meat, knowing what he's doing. He knows that what he's looking at is the temple or sacrificial meat. But he had a lapse about the impurity. He forgot that he's impure. Or maybe the lapse was on the other side. He became inadvertent. He forgot that this structure is the temple, or that it is sacrificial meat, what he's looking at, while knowing that he's still impure. But he goes in and eats, thinking that he's going in or eating a permitted object, because he forgot that it's the temple or sacrificial meat. Or maybe his forgetfulness was complete. He was totally inadvertent. He forgot both that he's impure, and he also forgot that it's sacrificial meat, or that it's the temple, and he goes in or he eats the meat. And then he finds out these matters that were forgotten to him. He will have to now bring the fluctuating sacrifice in every scenario of these 6 categories. Where either you remembered that you're impure but forgot that it's the temple, or forgot that it's sacrificial meat. That's 2 cases. Or you knew it was sacrificial meat or the temple, but you forgot that you were impure. That's 2 more cases. Or you forgot both. You forgot that you're impure and it's temple, or you forgot that you're impure and it's sacrificial meat. In all cases, since you had a prior awareness in the beginning, you knew everything. You knew that you're impure, you knew that it's the temple, you knew that it's sacrificial meat, and then you forgot one or both of those elements. Now you have to bring Karban Eila. Says the Rambam, how do I know this? It's a revolutionary statement. How do I know what I'm telling you? That you have to have prior awareness and then later forgetfulness, and only then, when you find out, will you be liable to a sacrifice? Says the Rambam, we have to look at the texts. Let's examine the Torah's verses. In every other prohibition that one does inadvertently, it says that a person sins, the person does one of God's commandments that you're not supposed to do, and he becomes guilty, and then he finds out the sin which he sinned. Where does Torah put the word find out? Hoida. It only puts it at the end. Once he knew at the end, even if he didn't know in the beginning, he is still liable to the sacrifice which Torah delineates afterwards, the classic sin offering. But when it comes to the verses describing a ritually impure person who goes into the temple or eats sacrificial meat, look what it says, pay attention. It was forgotten from him. V'hu yada, and then he found out v'ashem, and therefore he's guilty. Torah says the word it was forgotten from him. Me'achar shenemar v'nela mimenu. Since Torah says that he had to forget it, miklal shahisa sham yediya batchila. That means that there was a knowledge in the beginning. V'nemar v'hu yada v'ashem. And then it says afterwards he finds out and he's guilty. Halamadata, from this we learn, shehu tzarich yediya batchila, v'yediya basayf, v'helem bintayim. Knowledge in the beginning is required, then it has to be forgotten from him, an active forgetfulness, because he knew about it first, and then he reminds himself and knows at the end. Halacha beis, let's talk about now some variations. Nitma, v'yada shenitma, v'yada shezeh kodesh v'shezeh mikdash. A person becomes impure, he knows that he's impure, he knows that what he's looking at is sacrificial meat or the temple. So it would sound like he met the condition of prior awareness. But, says the Rambam, even in the prior state, he never knew exactly which type of ritual impurity he got. There are many types of impurity, as we're going to see in the next book at length. Av Tuma, primary source of impurity, there are many such primary sources. So he knew that he was impure, but he didn't know in which type of impurity. And then, v'shachach shenitma, he forgets that he is impure. V'achar kach nichnas lamikdash, and then he goes into the temple premises, or he eats sacrificial meat. And then afterwards, he finds out what primary source of impurity did he become impure from. So that seems to be a new detail which he never had prior awareness about. Nevertheless, as the Rambam is a chayav karban, he's liable to a sacrifice, even though he doesn't know to begin with in which type of primary source he became impure. As long as he knew that he was impure, there was a knowledge of impurity in the beginning. But what if, let's say, the lapse of awareness was about the laws of impurity? He didn't forget that he was impure, he forgot the laws of impurity. He became impure by coming into contact with a lentil-sized piece of a dead rodent. We'll get into this in the next book. Certain dead rodents listed in the Torah, if you touch a lentil size of their flesh, you become impure. But this guy, he knew that touching a rodent makes you impure, but he didn't know the amount that makes you impure. So, pay attention. What did he know in the beginning? He didn't actually know that he's impure. He knew that what he touched could make you impure, but he didn't know the exact amount. Then, he completely forgets that he touched a rodent. Goes into the temple or eats sacrificial meat. And then he finds out that he touched a lentil-sized portion from the rodent, and he learns the law that makes you impure. So now, it's a bit different than the first case. In the first case, he had a full prior awareness of being impure, he just didn't know the source of his impurity. Here, it's almost like he didn't have 100% certain knowledge of being impure in the beginning, because he didn't know the exact amount that makes you impure from a rodent. Says the Rambam, this is a doubt, if you are liable to a sacrifice or not. Similarly, a person never saw the temple ever in his life, so he couldn't know its place. Let's say he became impure, knows that he's impure, but he goes into the temple totally unaware. He didn't know that's his place, because he never saw it. Then he remembers his impurity, and he finds out that this is the holy temple. This is a doubt. Is the knowledge that there is a temple in the world, is that called prior awareness? Or does he have to actually know where the temple is also? Because of course this guy knew that there is a temple. He just never saw it. Doesn't know where it is. Question is, does the knowledge that there is a temple constitute prior awareness? And it's a doubt. What do we do in the case of doubt? The Rambam rules, it seems to me, these people who are liable to a sacrifice out of doubt, should not bring a sacrifice. Because perhaps they're bringing in mundane sacrifices into the temple courtyard, which is not allowed. Says the Rambam, you're going to counter to me, you're going to say to me, what are you talking about? We have many other scenarios of doubts where you bring, let's say, an extra bird as a sin offering, you just don't eat it, but you can still sacrifice it. So why not over here? Says the Rambam, because the case of the birds, anybody who has to bring a bird is lacking full atonement. He would be forbidden to eat sacrificial meat till he brings the atonement. So if we don't let him bring the atonement, he will never be able to partake in a sacrifice again. But anybody else who's not considered in that category of lacking atonement for completing a state of purity, we're not going to make him bring a sacrifice out of doubt, and so we'll tell him to abstain and just bring nothing. Halacha Gimel, Misha Nitma Ba'azara. Interesting question. Person becomes impure inside the temple courtyard. Till now we're talking about a person who becomes impure and then enters the temple courtyard, temple premises. This person was already there. He became impure inside the courtyard. He still has to have prior awareness. He needs to first be aware that he had become impure and that the place he's standing in is the temple premises. And if he then forgets that he became impure while still remembering that it's a temple, or he forgets that it's a temple but he doesn't forget that he is impure, or you forget both details, when you find out, you bring the fluctuating sacrifice. Because you meet all the criteria. You have prior awareness afterwards, and lapse in the middle. That's only provided that you waited in the temple enough time to consider your impurity to take effect. As we explained in the laws of forbidden entry to the temple, that if you become impure in the temple, there's a way out. You have to find the speediest way out and take it and run outside. So long as you didn't wait that amount of time, so long as you didn't delay, it's not considered being in a state of impurity in the temple, because you couldn't control it. You tried your best, you got out. If you waited in the temple, the delay amount of time, which is as the Rambam described over there, the time it takes to complete a full act of prostration in the temple, totally bowing down and reciting certain verses, then you're now considered to be impure in the temple, and then if you had the prior awareness and the awareness afterwards and the lapse in the middle, then you bring a sacrifice. Halacha dalid, misha timei atzmei b'meizid v'leisha kashir. A person makes himself impure purposely, and he did not delay himself the requisite time in the temple. In other words, he's inside the temple courtyard, and he made himself impure, but he ran out right away. Harei ze safek, that's now considered a doubt. Even though Torah does allow a little time frame to get out, but that maybe could only be if you became impure beyond your control. It's a doubt. Im shir ishtachavaya la'anus bilvadei af lemezid. Does this time frame of prostration for somebody only who became impure beyond their control or even purposefully? Therefore, if in that state, he forgets that he's impure and he leaves without delay, he cannot bring the sacrifice even when he finds out later. Same thing if he hung himself in the airspace of the Azara. Hadavar Safek, it's a doubt. Im avir Azara ka Azara, ein ka Azara. Is the airspace of the temple courtyard like the temple courtyard or not? Halacha hey, misha nistapek la yim nichnas la mikdash. Achal kodesh betuma ilav. Let's say a person is in doubt whether he went into the temple or ate sacrificial meat while being impure. So it's like any other case of a sin offering. But if you're in doubt, we learned the other day, you bring an asham tali, a special sacrifice for being in doubt. What about over here? Says the Rambam, there's no asham tali for this. You never bring a sacrifice for a doubt, except for a penalty of excision, an excision prohibition, for which you'd be liable a standard sin offering for doing it inadvertently. But the fluctuating offering doesn't have an asham tali for cases of doubt. Halacha vav, consider the following case. A person has in front of him two paths. One is pure, one is impure. You know that on one of them is a corpse or whatever it is, it will make you impure if you walk on it, but you don't know which one. He walks down both paths. He walks down the first path, he walks down the second path. But pay attention here. When he walked on the second path, he forgot that he walked on the first path. So now, if you consider the case truthfully, he is impure because he's been down both paths. But in his mind, he hasn't been down both paths. So he isn't fully aware of the impurity. But he's partially aware. In other words, he's aware that he may have become impure. Then this partial awareness of impurity also goes away. He forgets that. And then he eats sacrificial meat or goes into the temple. Chayav, he is liable. Now, even though he didn't have a complete awareness that he was impure before. Only a partial knowledge. He He didn't remember that he walked on both paths. For on walking on both paths, you become for sure impure. He didn't have that in his mind that he walked down both paths. Nevertheless, he's liable to a sin offering, because partial awareness is like full awareness. If he walked down the first path, he only walked on one, and then he goes into the temple or eats sacrificial meat. He's exempt because we aren't even sure that he's impure. You don't know if it was the impure path or the pure path. Halacha Zayin, the case continues. He walked down one path, we're still in a doubt if he's impure. Okay? But he might be ritually impure from a dead body. So just in case, he's a shlishi ushvi, he gets sprinkled with the ashes of the para aduma, third day and seventh day, as the Torah dictates. We'll see in the next book at length, if you become impure from a corpse, you get the ashes of the para aduma sprinkled on you twice. So he does that. V'taval, and he goes to the mikvah, achar shenichnas lamikdash, after having gone into the temple, after going on the first path, as we said. V'halach b'sheni, and now he walks on the second path. V'chazar v'nichnas lamikdash, and he goes back into the temple. So the case could be made that since he has become totally pure from the first path, now walking on the second path only makes him again doubtfully impure. Nevertheless, as the Rambam chayav, now you're liable to bring a sacrifice. Why? Not because now we're sure that you walked on the impure path, but because taking the whole story into account, there's one point at which you went into the temple ritually impure. Either the first or second time. Even though each time it's only a doubtful awareness, because every doubt is only probable, it's doubtful. Here there's a special law. In the case of ritually impure coming into the temple eating sacrificial meat, even a doubtful awareness is called an awareness. And therefore, if from the combination of two cases we can ascertain that you were for sure impure when into the temple, you're going to be held accountable for that. A person was impure. He knows he's impure. And two people confront him and they tell him, you should know, you went into the temple while you were impure. He says, no, I never went in. He's believed and he won't bring a sacrifice, which is a big novelty, because usually when you contradict witnesses, witnesses are believed. But why are you believed here? Because if he wants, he could say, agree to the witnesses and say, you know what? You say I went into the temple? Yeah, I did it purposely. And in that case, he wouldn't be liable to bring a sacrifice. So since he could have responded in a way that would not make him liable to bring a sacrifice, and also wouldn't have contradicted the witnesses, now that he's contradicting them, exempting himself, we're going to believe him. If two people told him, not that he went into the temple, everyone agrees that he went into the temple. They're just saying, we know that you were impure when you walked into the temple. You became impure in front of us. You knew you were impure, so we're telling you that you had a prior awareness. And you went into the temple. Even though there was much time between the day that they're testifying that he became impure to the day that he went into the temple, and he could say, I went to the mikvah already, I was already pure. If he chooses to contradict the witnesses and say, I never became impure to begin with, the witnesses are believed, and he has to bring a sacrifice based on their words. Why? Because here we apply the rule of witness to strength. If two people can bring a person to death, which is stringent, certainly they can bring him to a sacrifice, which is lighter, because he went against their word. And when you contradict the witnesses, usually they are believed. Halacha tes, tumas mikdash v'kadashav, shahaya la yediyah batchila, v'lehaya la yediyah basayf. Interesting halacha. A person became ritually impure, went into the temple and ate sacrificial meat. Thing is, he knew about it before, but he forgot and he never remembered. He never found out that he was impure and went into the temple and ate sacrificial meat. Sorry shel Yom Kippurim, hanasa bifnim, v'yom Kippurim toilin. So what happens is, the goat on Yom Kippur, whose service is performed inside, in the Holy of Holies, and the fact that Yom Kippur passes, bring his atonement to hang in the balance, ad sheyivad alai, v'yavi karbanei leviyed, till he finds out, and then he'll bring a sacrifice. In other words, Yom Kippur achieves a quasi-atonement for the fact that he doesn't know. If he does find out later, great, find out later and bring your sacrifice. But until then, the power of Yom Kippur kind of takes care somewhat of the atonement. Let's say there was no prior awareness in the beginning. only in awareness at the end, in which case you don't bring a carbon Eilev Yerdit. Is there some kind of atonement? Says the Rambam, yes. Soir hanasa b'chutz, the goat that's performed outside, sent off a cliff. V'yem HaKippurim mechaprin. This procedure atones for that completely. Because you can't bring a sacrifice, this procedure will be the atonement. What about those cases where Hashem's in control? You didn't know you became impure before and you never found out later. Interesting, the goats that we bring on holidays and the goats that we bring on Rosh Chodesh for a sin offering, for a communal sin offering, takes care of exactly such situations. Ritual impurity that was totally unaware. And for doing this sin purposely, a person is ritually impure and purposely goes into the temple, purposely eats sacrificial meat, where of course you cannot bring a sacrifice. If the person who did it was a Kohen, then the bull brought on Yom Kippur by the high priest achieves atonement. If he was a regular Jew, the blood of the goat performed inside and the passage of the 24 hours of Yom Kippur, mechaper also achieves atonement. Shanemar, as it says, that when the Kohen Gadol sprinkles the blood inside, he achieves atonement over the holiness from the impurities of Israel. It's an ambiguous verse. What does it mean? It means exactly this, that the high priest achieves atonement for Jews who were impure and went in to the holiness purposely, and therefore cannot bring a sacrifice. This service of Yom Kippur achieves atonement for that.